In this video, I'm talking all about long exposure photography and how you can take long exposure photos during the day. So let's get into it. So first of all, what is a long exposure photo? Essentially, a long exposure photo is when your camera opens up its shutter for an extended period of time and lets in loads of light into the camera sensor. The resulting effect is a blurring of movement in all of your photos. Now, famous examples of this are traffic lights that bleed into one another and they make a gorgeous light streak, people blurring into one another when there's loads of people moving, or water that suddenly looks beautifully still and calm. Now, long exposure photography is very simply achieved by placing your camera onto a tripod and pulling your shutter speed all the way down to a tiny number. Essentially, the longer your shutter is open for, the more light and the more motion blur you're going to get in your photo. So if you open up your shutter speed to 30 seconds, it means the shutter in your camera is going to open for an entire 30 seconds, and all of the movement within that 30 seconds is going to be blurred into one another, and that is creating a long exposure photo. But the problem is, long exposure photography is mostly known for the evening. Most long exposure examples you will see are car lights passing by. And the reason why is because when you open up your shutter speed for that amount of time, not only are you letting all the motion blur into one another, you're also letting 30 seconds worth of light into your camera sensor. But this doesn't really matter so much when you're capturing photos in the evening, because you can counteract this by increasing your aperture. Now that brings me on to the next point. Why can't you just do the same thing when you're taking long exposure photos in the day? Why can't you just increase your aperture and pull down your ISO to get darker shots when you're doing long exposure? Well, the problem is you don't have enough settings in your camera to make your photo properly exposed when you're opening up your shutter speed for that long. So this means if you're doing long exposure photography, if you open up your shutter for any more than half a second, then it's going to be completely overexposed, even if you adjust your aperture and your ISO to be as dark as possible. So this is where an ND filter comes into play. And this is a neutral density filter. A neutral density filter is essentially a black piece of glass, and this is basically a pair of sunglasses for the front of your lens. Now, ND filters are rated in their strength. So typically, if you're a photographer, you're aware of ND2, ND4, 6, 8, and 10. The higher the number, the more intense and the darker the image is going to be. But this specific ND is ND 1000. So basically what this means is when I screw this onto my camera, if I'm not shooting long exposure, everything is going to be completely underexposed. In fact, everything will be completely black because this looks like you're basically putting on the lens cap. You're completely covering the lens. But that is exactly the point. This is adding so much darkness in front of the lens. It's blocking out so much light. This means when you open up your shutter speed to 30 seconds, you've got 30 seconds of light coming into the sensor. Because this filter is so dark, you can let in all of that light and your image will be properly exposed. So if you want to take a long exposure photo in the day, you follow all the exact same practices. You put your camera on a tripod, you set your shutter speed to whatever you want to set it to, set all of your other settings accordingly, place the ND filter in front of the camera, and you're good to go. So thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate your support, and I will see you in the next video. See you there.